So here's something super interesting. So I've gone into depth and talked a lot about the issue that had come up within the progressive wing of politics, in which there were objections from certain people when Alexandria Ocasio Cortez made the statement that we should rally behind all Democrats, including the governor, of course, being Andrew Cuomo, and a lot of people were angry about it for, totally understandable reasons because obviously Andrew Cuomo is a hugely corrupt douchebag and a douche. But the main person who was doing this was Jimmy Dore, and this definitely sent ripples across the progressive sphere. We saw what Sam Seder had to say about Jimmy Dore's criticism of what Alexandria Ocasio Cortez did. Now, here's something interesting. So, a caller called into the David Pakman show and asked him about this. And let's see what David Pakman had to say about this.
David, this is Patrick calling from Indiana. So recently I was listening to a conversation between Sam Seder and Benjamin Dixon, and the substance of the conversation was what Sam described as the dumb left.
Right.
And more specifically, he was talking about Jimmy Dore and kind of Jimmy's, I would call it, progressive purity test. And he had recently criticized Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie for not towing the progressive line enough. And just kind of on a broader scale, he kind of criticizes Democrats and liberals more than he would ever criticize a Republican, kind of using whataboutism and whatnot. And I think he basically just taps into the anger that some people feel on the left. And I kind of agree with Sam and Benjamin's point about that might turn off those people from even participating in the election, kind of furthering progressive ideals. So I just kind of wondered what your take on that whole situation was, and if you agreed.
I completely agree with Sam and Ben on this issue. I believe that the involvement of Jimmy Dore in politics has become completely toxic. I've cast a wider net in terms of that toxic element of the left, and I don't know that this is the right characterization, but you might remember me previously talking about what I describe as the Leninist left of Vladimir Lenin, Leninist. And I don't think it's really fair to group Jimmy Dore under that. But there is this contingent of the left that, by virtue of a combination of, as you point out, whataboutism, so-called progressive purity tests, and a whole bunch of other mechanisms that I've described, they end up being useful idiots. And I want to be clear, calling them idiots it's not an ad hominem. Useful idiot is a specific sort of political term that has, basically it means you are unknowingly becoming a tool furthering the objectives of those who you either don't realize you're furthering the objectives of, or those you would on paper believe you're on opposite sides. I think that it's become completely toxic. I know that there are people in our audience who are fans of all combinations of these shows, but I think it is absolutely, brutally, completely counterproductive to everything that progressives are actually working for. I believe it is not pragmatic. I believe it is ideologically misguided, and that's where I am. So on that issue, I'm with Sam and Ben 100%.
And if I have a little bit more time, I was wondering if you maybe felt the same way about, say, a guy like Glenn Greenwald, who's a pretty big Russia skeptic and all that. And
I don't know. Listen, I'm going to be honest. I only am tangentially aware of what any of these people are actually doing day to day. So my opinion is based on, sitting down and saying, let me look at a sampling of the last 3 months of what they've done. And they may be doing things every day that don't fall under this. I've seen less of Greenwald's stuff than I've seen of Jimmy Dore's. Like, I've actually seen more of Jimmy Dore's clips, and more so than his clips, I've seen a lot of analyses of his clips where pieces of his clips are played. And so with Greenwald, I would be less able to say for sure. But from what I saw in One Democracy Now! Appearance that he did, he seemed to be totally whitewashing any possible Russian interference or anything of it. Anything involving Russia in a way that seemed extraordinarily and generously exculpatory of Trump and his cronies, in a way that seems very disconnected from the evidence on the ground.
All right, beautiful. That's kind of what I wanted to ask you. So thanks for taking my call. Big fan.
Okay, great. Thank you for calling in. Really appreciate it.
So it's not like that was something unexpected that David said, but What I had wished was is I had wished that David had said something or had spoken about specific things that Jimmy Dore had said or specific assertions that he had made, because prior to this Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thing, when it came to the whole endorsement stuff, I think David would essentially still have pretty much the same criticism of Jimmy Dore. So he says like he doesn't like that Jimmy has purity tests, but there's a bunch of criticism about purity tests, but the truth of the matter is that purity tests are definitely very important. It just depends on what your purity test is. Where does your purity test lie? Because, you know, one person's purity test can be something super easy to pass, while another person's purity test is extremely hard and almost impossible. So I think a good purity test is my personal purity test as to whether or not you are a true progressive who deserves my full enthusiasm and my full enthusiastic support is if you support Medicare for all. If you believe in Medicare for all, you are somebody who is a true progressive and you deserve enthusiastic support. If you don't, well, I don't really like you because you're not really a progressive. And most of the time, when people who are candidates who don't, agree with Medicare for all, they are instead they're not going to be for supplements, things that are similar, like when it comes to free college education or whether it be a living wage in every state. So, anyways, what I wanted to say here is that the purity test thing I don't really know about because I think it's important to have some level of a purity test, because I'm not trying to be out here supporting people who are not real progressives. When it comes to what David Pakman is saying, I agree with David Pakman to the extent that he's speaking specifically about the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez situation, on top of Jimmy Dore stating that the Democratic Party takeover by progressives is not real and it's not happening. Because, as I've already explained, I deeply, deeply disagree with the idea and the assertion that the Democratic Party takeover by progressives is a failure, it's not going to work, and we need a new third party, and it's going to immediately be a success. I believe that the Justice Democrats, they have already had 26 victories already. Again, I've already explained that when Justice Democrats was first formed, I wasn't even sure if they were going to get a single fucking representative. So the fact that they were able to get this many nominees already is insanity, because this is the first election cycle since the 2016 primary, and that sort of progress is huge. Now, what Jimmy Dore wants to do instead is start up a new third party, but the issue is number one, I think he's miscalculating in the idea that it'll be the most popular party in the country, because there's still idiots in New York who are voting in Cuomo instead of Cynthia Nixon. There's still the fucking idiot imbeciles who are doing that, voting against their own interest. When there's, Nicki Minaj going on Twitter, who's supposed to be like the leftist who supports, the black community, comes out and says, go vote for Andrew Cuomo. There's idiots like that. So I don't think that it would be the most popular party. I think that, especially because ballot access would be virtually non-existent for a while for the new party that he wants to create, because Jimmy Dore wants to create a new party, and he seems to be extremely impatient with the movement of progressive takeover of the Democratic Party by the Justice Democrats. And so if you're going to exhibit that much of a lack of patience, you're going to have a level of patience that is literally to the 10th, or let's say to the trillionth power of what you're exhibiting now. You're going to need a lot more, because it's going to be a lot more difficult to get a new third party elected and going through and be able to make change. It's going to take a long time. So I agree with David Pakman to the extent that Jimmy Dore is not correct about the progressive takeover, the Democratic Party is non-existent, and that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been co-opted and that sort of stuff. I don't agree with Jimmy on that stuff. But there's also the other side of the coin, which is that, I think that it's important to be extremely tough on the Democrats, and I think David Pakman I give him a lot of leeway in that area, but honestly, he's not really that hard on Democrats. So obviously, he supported Bernie Sanders during the primary, so that's good. And I've no doubt in my mind is he like a real progressive and supports true progressives, but I think that he's definitely the weakest in attacking weak Democrats, people who are these sort of fake lefties, and obviously, neoliberal corporate shills. So there's also, the other side of the coin where it's like, I don't disagree with certain purity tests. Like, I think we should have purity tests for whether or not we should really support someone. Now, the nuances start to multiply when you start talking about election races, because you start asking yourself, okay, you have to weigh out options. Like if let's say there's some Democrat in a race where there's a horrible Republican as his opposition. Let's say like it would be Ted Cruz, for example. Who are you going to vote for in that? Or Roy Moore, we just had that. So, and because Doug Jones is a pretty shitty Democrat, he's very weak. But anything is better than Roy Moore. And the nuances start to increase in the levels of powers, because you start talking about Hillary Clinton, and should you vote, depends on where you are and that kind of different stuff. So I agree with some of what David Pakman says, but not all of it, because I think that there's also a part that David Pakman is actually missing in what he's saying. But some of it's correct. I'm not really feeling some of it though.